So you're going to tackle a 70-mark question. Well, I thought a few tips wouldn't hurt as you prepare for what is a daunting journey. It's not easy to learn how to do these questions. In actual fact, I'd say, because you're really dependent on some quick, clever interpretation of sources and you don't know what's going to land in front of you, I'd say this might even be the hardest thing that you have to do at any point during your post-16 history course, and that goes for year 12 and year 13. There's no shame in getting this question wrong, but there is shame in not trying to do the right things. And in this first advice video, I'm going to try to help you to begin tackling a 70-mark question in the correct way. The first thing to do is look very, very carefully at the question. What are the key aspects? You should never skim read the question, and you should always sit and think about them carefully. If you set off down the wrong path, then you can wave bye-bye to anything resembling even a C grade. And I'll tell you now, if I was sat answering this, even now as your teacher, I'd sit and think about the question carefully before I started. So if I'd do it, and I've got a history degree and loads of experience history teaching, then you really need to be doing it. After you've identified the key aspects of the question, you need to look through the sources to consider how you will group your sources together. Your bog standard roller cola sixth former will stick to two groupings, for the hypothesis and against the hypothesis. However, your premium champagne sixth former will be able to see that the question isn't always black or white, and thus there might be a third interpretation or maybe even a fourth. We'll look at an example. What are the keywords in this question? Well, the keywords are decision, final solution, long-standing, widespread and hatred. Your bog standard sixth former would group the sources into sources that support the view that the decision to implement the final solution was because of a long-standing hatred, and they would make another group for sources that disagree with this. A champagne sixth former might look carefully at the sources and the question before grouping the sources into the following categories. Sources that support the view that the decision was widespread and long-standing. Sources that support the view that the decision was not part of a long-standing widespread hatred, as though there was some hatred, it was not widespread or long-standing. And a third group, which would be sources that support the view that the decision was nothing to do with hatred, but was taken by the Nazis for more practical reasons to do with the war than for reasons of hatred. You see, you still assess and look for support for the hypothesis, but instead of looking just for a simple against paragraph, you can also look for other possible hypotheses from the sources. Now, if you're interested to test yourself or to see what I'm talking about, I've included the particular specimen question and the sources underneath this video. Let's have a look at another example. What do you think of the keywords in the following question? Pause the video to see if you can spot them. I'd go for willing and collaborators. It's a bit less long-winded than the other question. Now perhaps you could test yourself by pausing the video and looking at the sources, which I've also included in a file under this video. What groupings would you go for? Here's what I would suggest. I'd do one paragraph and grouping which would be all about which sources support the idea that the church were willing collaborators. You always have to consider the support for the hypothesis, and there always will be some. I'd do another paragraph and the group would be all about how the church was not collaborating at all. And my final and champagne sixth former paragraph would be about how the church might have collaborated with the Nazis, but they didn't do it willingly. Once you have your groups, you can do an intro and then begin on your paragraphs. You should have one paragraph for each grouping and then end with a conclusion. The conclusion should be about what the weight of evidence suggests in reference to the hypothesis. Not what you think, but what the evidence seems to suggest. We'll go into more detail about this at a later date when you've done some of these 70-mark questions and when I've got some examples to show you. So much of whether or not you get an excellent grade on this paper relies on your plan for this question. As I've said, if you go off down the wrong path, you're absolutely jiggered. And this is why you must set aside time to consider your plan before you start to write your answer. Your teachers and, more importantly, the exam board want to see some evidence of planning before you start your answer. And that's what we certainly want to see when you have your first go at this. Good luck.